I thought I'd talk about the inception of this. Paul rightly did the whole timeline of the EngD. I was involved really at a very early stage, 1990, before there was EPSRC, the Science and Engineering Research Council, and science had a different sort of role to engineering then, I think. I think what was happening at the time was quite interesting in my own way. And the Minister was very kind to talk about my role as starting this up. I think I refer to myself, and I'll finish by saying I think I'm the midwife to the EngD, and I will pay tribute to someone else in a minute. That is a song played by the students of a Catholic school in Bolton. And they put to a previous minister their concern. They wanted an innovation laboratory to get on with engineering in an innovative way, and no one would listen to them. And he came to a meeting like this, and they played him that song. They now have a laboratory in Bolton where they do the most fantastic work. But their concern, and we're taking you back to the 1990s now, early part of the 90s, we all had that concern, I think, about what was happening. And it was when the government and the research councils were thinking, what do we do now? SERC itself was saying, and particularly I'd just been invited to go on that Engineering Board's Education and Training Committee. I don't quite know why. I think it's because I was the only engineer that had looked at some theory of education. And I'd just gone to Brunel. Prior to that, I'd been the head of a school of architecture. This is where I learned to design waistcoats and bow ties, by the way. You may wonder why I didn't become an architect. Well, this might tell you. But I felt I had to take a part. I was the first engineer in Britain to run a school of architecture. And I think what engineers have to do is they have to learn how to blend in with what they're doing. And actually, academics have to do it as well. So, there's David Clark in the audience, and Mark Richmond and Vince Osgood and various other people said, we want someone to take a fresh view of what's happening in the Engineering Board's education and training. So, urgent need for change. Let's be something more directive. Let's get on with it. Let's make something relevant. And when I went to Brunel, I had the fortune to be made a Lucas Professor of engineering enterprise, in a way. And this is where I met the real father of the EngD, Professor John Parnaby. But just before I get on to him, I'm taking you back to the 1990s again. And you may not know this, but the doctorate is quite new in this country. They've been around for millennia. But it wasn't until 1917 that Oxford was the first university to have a PhD at all. And you can see how it's normally based. It's academic supervising. There's the academic on the left. I haven't quite got there yet. And he's asking the student how things are going on. And it's about building theory. Now, I'm perhaps overstating this case, but in 1990, even as an engineer, I sort of felt that way. And in the background, this is behind the window, our business and the community. And they were desperate to get in to learn how to do new things. But I remember students saying to me at the time, look, if we start working with business and the community, we'll never get our doctorate finished. We need time to get on with what we're doing. Those people from business and the community. And to a large degree, and people like John Parnaby felt that the traditional doctorate was making that worse, not better. And a lot of people saw that as a real issue. But the key thing, if you're a research student, they have a vested interest. How do I get this done in 3 years? Not how do I spend a long time doing it, because if they didn't get through, the things were lost to them. And good research does need time, and it does need time to do it well. And one thing we were always set on when we set up the EngD, that it would still be good research, but good relevant research. And I like to think there were people like me around, and John Parnaby and others, and actually, can I say, a lot of people in this room, who said, I understand what you're doing. I know where you're coming from. Student, you've got to think differently. Now, I think time has almost taken it over. The students are telling us what they want and not the other way around. So engineers particularly were questioning that, as the minister said. But here is the man, to me, who made all the difference. You know, he was an apprentice. He came from Workington, and he learnt engineering what I would call the hard way. And he had a most amazing enthusiasm. And when I went to my first meeting at Lucas Industries in Solihull, he took me to one side and said, James, we've got to work together to make things happen. So, you know, he set up this committee to say, well, how would we make it happen? What do we need? You know, there are two phrases there that he used, but they are phrases that have become part of this new association and part of the whole raison d'etre for the EngD. And I actually think he is the father of the engineering doctoral programme. I think there's a mother to the engineering doctoral programme, and that happened to be the committee I work with. It was a fantastic committee, of which John Parnaby was a part, and backed up by some marvellous officers. I've mentioned some of them earlier. And what they said is, how can we take Parnaby's principles and stage manage them into the real world? So the list there says, you know, it's not just about analysis, it's about synthesis and creativity. And quite often that's forgotten by traditional doctoral students. It's about the integration of science technologies with business. It's about sometimes quick and dirty looks, but thought out quick and dirty looks. And how can we get real business in there? I have a real thing in my own life about differentiating between need and demand. You know, as engineers, we have to understand what the need is, but if we don't work out what the demand is, no one's ever going to pay for it. And I think we go wrong often in that way. So it is about cost effectiveness. And I think we started to recognise some principles. So we sat down and we took Parnaby's ideas, and we had a year as well doing some brainstorming to produce the report that I fortunately sort of edited. And we came up with a cockshy. And David Clark will tell you, because he was more closely related to that, engineering board and then council were not terribly enamoured. And actually on the council at the time were very few engineers. And I think that's one of the things that we sort of have addressed. And so they weren't sure whether we needed this. So Mark Richmond said to me, he was then CEO of SERC, put a survey out to the heads of engineering schools right across the UK. I think there were about 90 then. So we sat down and we created this little survey. It was, I think it was only a page and a half, because we didn't think anyone would send it back otherwise. And what did they say? No. Remember, this was 1990, 1992, and now we're saying, and the minister's saying, heavens, we need it. And these were some really progressive guys. No, we don't want a specific engineering doctorate, and you can't call it DEng. Why? Because that's the highest accolade in academia, DEng. So, but we had some people in the camp. It was before we had the Royal Academy. It was then the Fellowship of Engineering. And people like John Parnaby and the Fellowship came back to us and said, you really got to do this, James. So, really nice person came along, Sir Mark Richmond. And he said, James, why don't you ask the universities again, but I'm going to give you £10 million. Now, I'm grossly simplifying that, but it was fascinating. So we said, we're going to have a prototypical program to begin with, an experimental program, five engineering doctorates, and if that works, we'll have another 5. And we put them out, and this may or may not surprise you, but of the 93 universities, 90 applied. And actually, some of them gave the most amazing applications, even then, although nearly all of them didn't want it to happen. So I don't know what that says about society, but it's that. And what we did agree to do was not to call it the DEng, but we decided to call it the EngD. And that's why it's called the Engineering Doctorate. And in a way, I'm so proud that that's kept going, that the name itself. And then we started to run it, the programs, or they started to run it. But we did it in close cooperation. The committee worked very closely with those early developments, and we tried to work with them to make it work. My colleagues were out there doing stuff. And actually we tried to find evidence of what makes a traditional PhD work, and we couldn't find anything at the time, so we had to make it up as we went along. But one of the things we were determined to do on the Education and Training Committee is to set up a review process, which I like to think is a really pragmatic review process. And I've been part of 2 of them. And what they do, they don't just review for the sake of it. They review to say, just as an engineer would, what can we do to make this better? How can we make it more cost effective? Where is it going? And we did listen, and it did change, and now it has all the names, different names it's called. And what's so exciting to me is that EPSRC and its new guys, it thinks what we're doing is compelling. Well, why wouldn't they? Because actually, it's repeat business. What the industry does is keep coming back to us because they like the product. Now, I think that's the biggest accolade of any higher education. Not we've got so many brownie points on some scale and metric, but do people like it well enough to back it? And we've heard the chairman talking about the 30% benefit on top of that. But what we also found when we did this was that it was just as big a challenge, an intellectual challenge, as the traditional PhD. And actually, I think we told some people in the PhD area what they should be doing, and what I think is fascinating now is this is spreading out in traditional doctorates. And we've heard how even universities who don't exactly like what we're doing are doing their own thing. And I think that's, when people copy you, and, well, they're copying you, then it's just marvellous. So, anyway, the rest is now history. So I think this is what we're doing. I like to think this is me, and you in the engineering. We're sharing knowledge creatively and learning from everyone. And I think what you've done is you've started to find out ways of adding real impact. So remember, this was occurring before there was something called impact. This is now sort of 1998, 1999. We were doing impact. You were doing impact. Now we have a name of it, and not many people probably know what they're doing. But anyway, that's a biased thing from an old retired person. But the key thing is that I think we now have an engineering doctorate which is demanded, back to my phrase, not just needed, but it's demanded. And the students that go through this are talented, they're at the leading edge, they're innovative, and they're doctoral engineers. And I'm sure we could have hundreds of wonderful stories. And what I'd like to see is us capturing those stories and getting them on the media in such a way. That's what I was alluding to. If people want to be estate agents because of location, why don't we have to do this in another way? So here they all are, everyone, all the disciplinary hats off, sitting around a campfire. One of my greatest things, often when I go to Finland a lot with Finnish vodka, that helps. But it's actually about people understanding each other's problems. And I think, to me, that's what the engineering doctorate stands for. And what our engineers do, they listen and respond. They don't just respond. Now, since I've stopped being involved with the research, I have my own little project called Universities for Modern Renaissance, and I'm trying to help universities develop the equivalent of this, but beyond engineering. And some of the phrases here you'll probably recognise because I've stolen them from engineering doctorates. This one is particularly precious to me, transdisciplinary teamworking. I think teamworking is absolutely critical. And I'm going to sort of finish with a story. Chris France is now an advocate. Roland Clift and I ran one of the early doctorates at Surrey in sustainability. And I had the task of trying to get students interested in team working. So they all came to my lecture on team working, and then Chris set up this marvellous exercise in Surrey where we sent out teams of people to do things for a whole day. And there were four of our engineering doctoral students, and they were probably the brightest and most creative doctoral students. Anyway, so we decided, but they had no way of knowing how to work with each other. So we put them all in a team together. And the whole thing was to solve some problems and come back to the HQ in Surrey. And the people who came in first won a prize. And the first group that came in were quite a balanced group of people, probably the high flyers. They came in and they won a prize. The next people came in, they won a prize. And it may not surprise you, perhaps it does, I don't know. These bright kids who in a way were the non-team workers, they didn't come in at all. And we all went home. But my secretary was contacted on Monday morning after this had all happened. And they said, they said to her, will you ask James Powell to send us his notes on team working? Because actually I think we need to learn something about this. And as much as anything, I learned a different way of trying to engage. So I think this launch, you can imagine, there's very little I've done in my life where you put up a cockshy, you know, if I am the midwife to this, and then it works, and you're all here, and we're at the Royal Academy of Engineers, and it's going to keep working. It's going to keep working. But when Chris Rance, Roland Clift, and I sat down in Surrey to think, would we be here in 20 years doing this? We, you know, all sorts of doubts in our mind. So, from me to you, fantastically well done. Because one of the things we did learn is we kept our hands off. I have these phrases, hands on and hands off. It's not that, it's about hands ready. And one of the things that Chris France did, and we worked with him on, the students, as much as anyone, ran our programs. And they said, this is what we want from it. So this launch is wonderful. And I'm sorry we have cut the cake, but this is my, you know, may I wish the program a very happy birthday. And I will take my midwifery memories away with me and look forward to the next 20 and 25 years' work. Thanks very much.